Here's what you've been missing over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Today, we are doing something a little, I would say unique, a little different. How about that? A little different. We are keeping our pinky toe in Gettysburg, and we are skipping ahead several years to another famous battle that involves one of the famous generals here at Gettysburg, and that is the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And who better to join me than Jim Hessler? Hello, Jim.
Hello, Matt.
We've been talking about doing this for months now.
Yeah, we have.
Finally got around to doing it, and I'm very excited about it. This is my other favorite battle.
Mine
my
too.
Second favorite battle.
You know, we share that passion for podcasting and Little Bighorn.
Yes.
Like how would two guys like that end up in the same
Someday
town?
when we're sick of Gettysburg, we should do a Little Bighorn podcast.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm Addressing Little Bighorn. Brought to you by Propane.
It
would
doesn't.
be great. It would be great.
It doesn't work as well addressing with other battles because there was no Little Bighorn address. But whatever. But anyway, so we decided. I said, Jim, why don't you come on? Let's do a show about Little Bighorn. But it's really just an excuse to talk about the Little Bighorn. And I said, well, you know, there's a couple of guys who are at Gettysburg there, so there's our tie-in. And
we'll try to.
Bob's your uncle. There we go.
Tangentially connect it all together so that, you know, the hardcore Gettysburg audience is not repulsed by the topic.
Like,
you know?
What is this?
Oh, my God. I'm canceling my Patreon subscription.
Yeah.
You know?
What am I paying for?
That's right. My God.
So let's give them a little bit of a background first. For those of you who are not Little Bighorn aficionados or even casual students of that battle, let's give you a background into that. What was it? What was the purpose? How did it come about? Why? What was going on? And then what happened on the battlefield?
Sure.
I mean, you don't have to get crazy into it, but give them an idea so that all this other stuff makes sense.
And you know, I would say, too, for anybody who's kind of skeptical about the topic, before we get into it, you know, you could argue Battle of Little Bighorn is actually even more iconic in American culture than the Battle of Gettysburg is. I'm not saying that it is, but you can make the argument.
You could make the argument.
You know, there's certainly an equal number of books, you know, specialty groups that are devoted to the topic. How many times has the Battle of Gettysburg been portrayed on screen versus the Battle of Little Bighorn? So,
I think Little Bighorn wins there.
I think they do win there. I think they do win there.
For decades.
You know, Custer just looks better on screen than George Meade does. So that, you know, that could be part of it too.
That is a huge part of it, I'm sure.
So yeah, for anybody who's skeptical, I would say, you know, this is, if you kind of look at this whole period, 1860s, 1870s, even up to, you know, Wounded Knee in 1890, this is a defining moment in, you know, our American experience. And, you know, it goes beyond 1863. But, you know, to answer your question, I think Where I often start is after Appomattox, after the close of the American Civil War. Obviously, the country is looking to expand westward.
Right.
At the same time, the Army is downsizing, yet they are also establishing a couple of new cavalry regiments to basically patrol this vast western frontier. And that's how the 7th Cavalry, comes into existence in 66.
So let's pause there for a second. So explain this now. We're students of the Civil War were used to these big, huge armies, corps, divisions, all that other stuff. But these regiments, 7th U.S. Cavalry, is what? It's posted somewhere out west, and it's responsible for this huge expanse of land. How does that all work?
Yeah. So generally what happens is, somewhat similar to Reconstruction, but what they do is, they carve up the country into these departments, these military departments. Hancock commands one, for example. And what they do is they raise a couple regiments of cavalry. They still have a few regiments of infantry in the field as well, but they raise these guys basically to, you'll be assigned here, and you're going to patrol, this vast, expansive frontier. Now, in the case of the 7th Cavalry, you're talking 12 companies, and what you see basically from the time they're formed in 1866 up until the Little Bighorn debacle in 1876, almost at no time do those 12 companies serve together. So to your point, it's not even like we're posted at a fort and we got to patrol the area. It might be like, okay, 8 companies are going to Dakota, 2 companies are going to Texas, send a couple companies to Kentucky. And so what you start to realize is, the Army of that period just has a ridiculous amount of space, to try to patrol and manage.
But not enough people.
And not enough people, because again, they've seriously downsized the numbers after the war.
What are we looking at the end of the war? What does the Army look like when everybody's gone home?
Yeah, I forget the numbers. I don't
roughly.
I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but you're looking at, obviously, most of our Civil War heroes have gone home, and what you have is you have some of the officers like a Custer, like a Hancock, John Gibbon, to throw some Gettysburg connections out there. You have these guys basically looking to stay in the Army, often at reduced ranks to what they were doing in the Civil War. You're no longer managing motivated volunteers. These are in many cases guys who can't get a job in another profession, kind of thing. Kind
of the dregs of society.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I hate to diminish these guys by using that label, but in a lot of cases, that's true. Immigrants, guys who look at an Army career is an opportunity, but really they can't get something anywhere else.
Guys avoiding the law?
Yeah. And so what you have is a lot of disciplinary issues, desertion rates, and things of that nature considerably higher than, again, what we're used to thinking of in the more highly motivated volunteer regiments of the Civil War.
So Custer, like many other officers, at the end of the war, gets bumped down to his regular Army rank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
End of the Civil War, we're talking. Which was captain?
Yeah. So he ends the Civil War as a brevet major general, but reverts to a regular rank captain at the end of the war.
And where does he go? Before he's out west, where he gets into the Little Bighorn, where does he first go after?
Yeah, well, they send him on to some Reconstruction duty in Texas. So he spends a little bit of time down there. And then, he actually, even for a while, looks at taking an assignment in Mexico. But Sherman, Sheridan, and Grant and those guys are kind of loath to let officers kind of leave to go go serve in a foreign service.
Yeah.
So after Reconstruction duty in Texas, he's kind of looking around a little bit for the next gig. And like I said earlier, until 1866, when they form the new 7th Cavalry, and he is then appointed lieutenant colonel of the regiment. It should be pointed out, the guy never commands the regiment. At no time in his career is he colonel of the 7th Cavalry. There's always somebody ahead of him, but usually it's an older officer, a guy who's more strapped to a desk, in St. Louis or places like that. And so what a younger and more enthusiastic and energetic guy like Custer gets is field command,
right?
And that's why he becomes so closely associated with the 7th.
It's at the time of the Little Bighorn was, let me see if I get this right. Sturgis?
Yeah.
Sturgis was the colonel.
Colonel Sam Sturgis, right. Another Civil War vet.
And he had a son who was in the regiment and got wiped out with Custer,
Unfortunately,
right?
yeah.
Okay, but so now, all right, so now he's second in command of the 7th. It's 1876. What's going on prior to the Bighorn campaign? What's going on that leads to that?
It leads up to all of that. Yeah, so, getting back to kind of the earlier point, we're talking about obviously there's westward expansion going in through the 1860s and into the early 1870s. Following Red Cloud's War on the Bozeman Trail in 66, 67, and the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, among many other things, basically gave the sacred Black Hills to the Sioux. And that was basically, confirmed that the Sioux were going to own the Black Hills. The problem is the country continues to expand westward in the early 1870s, and there's an economic panic, I think, in 73, if I remember correctly. But in 1874, Custer is ordered with the 7th to lead an army expedition into the Black Hills that's basically going to confirm gold in the Black Hills. Okay,
so now, there's a rumor of gold, and they want to go and confirm
exactly,
it.
And they go in and confirm it,
even though now it's sacred Sioux land.
Exactly. So now, of course, the U.S. government wants the Black Hills, and they try to negotiate. They try to get the Sioux to sell, and the Sioux are pretty solid that no, we're not giving up our Black Hills. And so finally, this comes to a head in the winter of 1876, where Grant, Sheridan, George Crooks, the War Department, they get together at the White House in January of 1876, or maybe it's late fall of 75. But what they basically say is that by the end of January 1876, we are going to send out a message to all the Indians out in the field, those who haven't come into the reservations. We're going to send out a message to them and basically tell them they have until January 31st to come into the reservations, and if you don't come in, we're going to turn the matter over to the War Department and send the army into the field to come and get you.
So wait, they're going to send a message at the late in January and then say by
exactly. It's
that same year?
It's a ridiculous notion.
Okay.
It's basically a legal form of saying, hey, we did our part. We told them we had it. They had until January 31st to come in. So it's a ridiculous notion. Obviously, no Indians out in the field are going to get this message. No. But it's kind of then the legal justification for Grant, who is kind of lukewarm on all of this, but it's legal justification for the Grant administration to turn it over to the War Department and for the military to go into the field and, potentially kind of quote unquote settle the Indian matter once and for all.
So Custer at that point in the year what's he up to at that point?
Yeah, so there was no great expedition of the 7th Cavalry in 1875. So he spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth to New York. But as they're starting to mobilize this campaign for the winter, and then it's going to bleed over into the spring of 1876, Custer is called to Washington to testify in a scandal that is basically involving Secretary of War William Belknap. There's allegations of graft and kickbacks and things going on in the appointment of post-traderships out west. They call Custer in to testify what he knows.
Right.
Custer's gotten kind of an unfair rap, I think, in this episode among historians, because, a lot of historians kind of do he went to Washington and he wanted to be president, and all this stuff. He actually didn't want to go. He was summoned to testify. He tried to get out of it. And, they said, no, you're summoned. You got to go.
Okay.
So he went to Washington. His testimony against Belknap also implicated Orville Grant, which then kind of ticked off President Grant,
his brother.
Exactly. And so what's happening now in the spring of 76, while Phil Sheridan and other military leaders are getting ready to put this expedition into the field, basically Custer's held up in Washington, and Grant is so ticked off at Custer. At one point, Grant basically says, tell the expedition to go forward without Custer. So Custer almost missed Custer's last stand.
Catch the rest of this episode and support the show over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.